I cannot wait for these teams to take the field, and especially to see the team that's going to host here. Penn State, it does feel like, even despite a few injuries in their front seven on defense, but offensively, the quarterback we've been hoping, I talked about before the season, Drew Aller, the way he'll need to ascend once we get to November. One game into November, I would say Drew Aller is ascending.
Quarterback battle is really interesting. We're going to do a deep dive into this game coming up in the next hour. We also have SI's Pat Forty with us from Louisville, not just a writer for Sports Illustrated, but also the co-host of the College Football Inquirer podcast, which gets roughly 80% of its content, I would say, right now from the Big Ten, Pat.
You know, we used to be, you could think the SEC would provide this stuff, but no, the Big Ten has been content rich, let's say that. So I appreciate the constant flow of news and reactions to news from the league.
Doing what we can over here. For now, though, the focus is going to remain on the field, and let's dive into our big story, which, as it is on every Wednesday, is the college football playoff rankings that were unveiled the night before. They bear an uncanny resemblance to the playoff rankings that were unveiled 8 days ago, as the top 8 stayed the same this week, meaning Ohio State remained number 1 ahead of two-time defending national champ Georgia. Michigan is still 3rd. Penn State did move up a spot to 10. Iowa is in at number 22. Future Big Ten members Washington and Oregon 5 and 6 respectively. The biggest intrigue to me focused on that top spot, Pat, and there was some question as to whether or not Georgia, having finally played a ranked team in Missouri and having beaten them reasonably handily, might end up jumping Ohio State. It did not play out that way. The Buckeyes remained ahead of the Bulldogs. They're significantly ahead of them in terms of strength of schedule. Are you comfortable with the way this came out last night?
I am. Yeah, I still think Ohio State's body of work is better than Georgia's. The Notre Dame win, losing a little bit of luster as Notre Dame's lost a couple more games, but still going to South Bend, win that, beat Penn State. So I think that's where Ohio State should be, and Georgia is where it should be at number 2. Now, the next couple of weeks may change that. Georgia's going to play Mississippi, and then Georgia's going to play Tennessee. You win both of those, I think Georgia moves up to number 1, pending what happens in Ann Arbor November 25th. But by and large, looking at this week's rankings, Dave, this was a meeting that could have been an email. Not much changed. Top 8 were still the top 8. I feel for the committee members that had to go spend 2 days in Grapevine, Texas, when you really could have gotten together maybe on a Zoom or whatever on Sunday and just said, are we changing anything? No, we're good here.
Yeah, I haven't been to Grapevine yet. I don't know. Maybe it's a lovely place.
Oh, you should go.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
It's not half bad?
Yeah,
okay, and
nice.
I hope they take care of the committee members while they're there in nice surroundings and everything. But I do think that it seems to me there is a growing chorus of folks who want Ohio State to apologize for some reason about not being the overwhelming Ryan Day offense that we've come accustomed to, and then sort of, having that bring their number 1 ranking into question in some regard. The resume is definitively there. And so then what is the balance of resume and eye test that folks would look for the number 1 team in the country? The resume is definitively better than either Georgia's or Michigan's. If you want to talk resume with Florida State, then sure, that's a part of the conversation as well. But in the end, we've seen Ohio State win multiple national championships this century. You're talking 2002 and 2014. With this formula, being a team that has playmakers on offense while a quarterback that's inconsistent but comes up in critical moments, and a defense that is stellar, that overwhelms their opponents. And we see an Ohio State defense that is able to do that this season. And in recent weeks, I've been trying to remind folks that it's okay for the Buckeyes to be that. This version of Ohio State under Ryan Day has one of the best defenses in America. And I don't know that there's any other team in the top 6 right now that bolster a receiver and running back combination like the Buckeyes can throw at you. And I love the fact that the committee is recognizing that. Not only resume, but when we're adding resume with, how are you comparing Ohio State with these like teams in that top 4, top 6 range? And it's not like the eye test sort of, favors anyone else definitively over the Buckeyes. They've got playmakers on the field.
Well, Michigan is benefiting the most from the eye test, I would say, because they're the only team in the top 16 that hasn't played a ranked opponent. Georgia was in the same boat before last week in the win over Missouri. I'd push back a little on the 14 team. I mean, I think the 14 team was more offensive based than this team is. But 2002, this team absolutely feels like that 2002 team, except for, I would say, Pat, this is a lot better team based on the eye test than it was 2 weeks ago. And the reason is, as Anthony discussed, like Travion Henderson is different than what we saw from him even all of last year. I mean, this is more along the lines of the guy who kind of took the Big Ten by storm a couple of years ago.
Sure is. You know what? I mean, he's having a great season when he's been able to be on the field, and you can see the difference in that offense based on when he's playing and when he's healthy. He had the huge run against Notre Dame, had a couple of big plays to help break open the Rutgers game. He's just a home run threat in the running game that they haven't had and in the short passing game. And the more attention people pay to Marvin Harrison, the more chances there are across the rest of the field for somebody else to make a play, and he can certainly do it. So Ohio State's offense is still evolving, I think, into its best form, and Travion Henderson is vital to that.
And I think, Dave, to your point, it's probably important to remember as well with that 14 team, with all the quarterbacks they cycled through, they became more offensively proficient, and Zeke Elliott just sort of took over the postseason that year. But there were some ups and downs for Ohio State's offense that year as well. Remember early in the season, that non-conference loss to Virginia Tech. And then by the end of things, yes, their offense became more consistently proficient in the midst of, cycling through quarterbacks at various points.
Right, fair enough. Obviously ended up winning the whole thing with a third-string quarterback, which was a remarkable tale, no doubt. Let's get into the games this week. And obviously, the biggest one is Michigan and Penn State. And we had talked about this notion I mentioned just a moment ago that Michigan is the one team that's benefiting most from the eye test because they haven't played a ranked opponent. They're going to play a ranked opponent this week. They go to Happy Valley. They battle Penn State. There is a lot swirling around this Michigan team, to say the least, Pat. What are you watching most closely as these two go head-to-head?
Yeah, starting, who's going to be the coach? We don't know what Jim Harbaugh's status may be for that game. I would expect he will be, but we don't know. What has been the level of distraction for him and the rest of the Michigan leadership in terms of trying to navigate through the whole Connor Stalions investigation in Big Ten back and forth to get to this game? This is not an opponent you can just kind of coast in and play against. So that's the starting point there. But then secondly, Michigan's offense has absolutely been humming lately, right? They've had 5 straight games of 40 or more points. That's not going to happen against Penn State. If it does, I'll be really impressed because Penn State's defense is excellent. They haven't allowed anywhere near that number of points to anyone this season. And I just think in Happy Valley, it's going to be tough sledding for Michigan. So if you don't get rolling offensively, then what's the level of pressure if you get caught up in a close game for the first time all season? Can you execute then? Do a couple plays go Penn State's way and give them a little bit of momentum and confidence early? And then beyond that, I think Michigan's defense is certainly up to the task of handling Penn State's offense. But this you got to be prepared, I think, if you're Michigan, to walk into a closer, low-scoring game that's going to go deep into the second half.
And I don't know that there's any team in the country, certainly no high-level national championship caliber team over the last few seasons, who we've seen have to navigate distraction, off-the-field questions as frequently as Michigan has, whether we're talking the off-season with Jim Harbaugh or in-season, not having him on the sideline in the initial games this year. So we've seen their leadership have to step forward time and time again, and they handled that so well from a lot of the guys who are still on the field, being there for them at this point this season as well. So they seem capable of that. But certainly Penn State is probably the team who it's different than early in the season when the schedule has been a bit softer. Now they're going into hostile territory in State College against a team in Penn State that is amongst the best defenses in America and that, in my opinion, has a quarterback coming off his best game of the season in Drew Aller. And so can Penn State put Michigan in a situation that we haven't seen them have to operate in, certainly not this season and not very much last year either? Can they get up on them early? Can they force them to play from behind? Can they force them to punt early in the game? Can they have a goal-to-goal scenario, something Michigan hasn't had to deal with this year?
One thing I think is really interesting when you look at Michigan, like if there is an area where they're really, really good, but maybe not great, to me it's the run game.
Yeah, agreed.
And so can you put this game into J.J. McCarthy's hands? And I think it kind of aligns a little bit with the point that you're making here, Anthony, but just kind of the notion of, and again, yeah, are they behind? Like, J.J. McCarthy has been phenomenal this year, but like, are you all of that? Like, hey, we might find out in this game because Penn State's hard to run it on. Michigan has struggled to run the ball. And then if it is in JJ's hands, you're going to have to deal with people in your face. And he hasn't had to deal with that a ton.
It is a pass rush for Penn State that, as quality as Michigan's offensive line, as deep as their O-line has been this season, they've rarely faced a front seven that throws this many things at you. And even if Chop Robinson isn't able to return the lineup for Penn State, they're just so deep. And Manny Diaz's defense just throws so much at you that their offensive line will have a task. And J.J. McCarthy will have the task of trying to make sure they're identifying the proper blitzers and setting protections in the correct way. And yes, Blake Corum is there and Donovan Edwards is there. And they've been good, especially Blake Corum has been good. But there's a standard for what that Michigan run game has been this season that they haven't necessarily lived up to snap in and snap out this year. And then being on the road and having to do that at Beaver Stadium with 100,000 plus, potentially just feeling like they're right on top of you like that, it's a position the Wolverines haven't operated in this season. And you know that James Franklin and Penn State are hoping to see how they can get Michigan behind the chains and see if they can have a pass rush that maybe overwhelms the opponent, because that's when they're at their best.
Pat, a final thought on this game before we move on?
Yeah, how about, Penn State's offense? What are they going to be able to produce here? I mean, having been to the Ohio State game, I was really underwhelmed with their performance there. I think they've got to get a better game out of their wide receivers. Can they separate? Can they make contested catches? That's been a big struggle for them. Can you turn a small gain into a big gain? Can you break a tackle here or there and peel off a big run after a catch? And then for Drew Aller, he's been a risk-averse quarterback, and that's been good. It's paid off for the most of this season. But this is not a game where you're going to be able to win, I think, by being risk-averse. You're going to have to take some chances and take some shots. Maybe not, there was the famous Q&A with James Franklin a few weeks ago about just chuck it deep and see what happens.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to throw it into some tighter situations and hope that you make a play, because you can't just sit and hold the ball and check down all game, I don't think, and move consistently against Michigan.
Right, 240 yards of offense in that Ohio State game that you were talking about. They were 1 of 16 on third down, and as we know, the one came on attempt number 16. They were 0 of 15 to get it started. That just won't do it against anyone, but it certainly won't do it against Michigan. I do want to talk a little bit about Ohio State, just in the context of the game. We talked about kind of what we think of them in terms of the CFP race, but what about in this matchup against Michigan State? I mean, the Spartans may be feeling a little bit more invigorated after a nice win a week ago. They finally get their first conference victory. What interests you about this game matchup-wise, Pat?
Well, yeah, I want to see what Michigan State brings to the table. They do probably have a better spring in their step, having won for the first time since September 9th. And, I think last week was a little bit of a kitchen sink game for them. I mean, you're seeing people passing the ball that have not before. Big question, who's the quarterback? Is Sam Leavitt going to burn a red shirt and play a fifth game this year? He had the big touchdown pass, incredible catch by Montori Foster in that game. Can they just put some stress on Ohio State with a little bit more of a freewheeling game plan, get some success there, and maybe put Ohio State into a pressure situation? Now, Ohio State was in that last week against Rutgers and handled it in the second half. They rose to the occasion in a bit of a difficult situation. I would imagine they can do the same thing certainly here at home, but I'd like to see Michigan State throw everything at them and see what happens.
And that interests me as well, Pat, because there have been really several weeks in a row where Michigan State was kind of throwing haymakers at opponents. And when you have a losing streak going in the way that Michigan State did, you're hungry for that first win. And now that they've gotten that first one for Harlan Barnett and you're sort of beyond that threshold, can you still keep that level of peak intensity that's there in a season that doesn't necessarily have the bigger goals to it? So will the players in that locker room, and it's Harlan Barnett's job now as the interim head coach, to make sure that they don't feel like one win is enough? This opportunity against Ohio State can be something that can allow an even more special moment for the players that remain there. And I do think the line of scrimmage, especially on Michigan State's defensive front, that's something where with health there, the way they can rush the quarterback, the way they can hit blocks, up front can force some punts for an Ohio State offense that, like we've been talking about, hasn't been overwhelming this season. And I think the quarterback position, Caden Hauser played well enough last week where if there is any concern about burning the red shirt for Sam Leavitt, then Caden Hauser being the guy that maybe runs the table as the full-time starter for Michigan State from here on out, I think they can veer well enough in that direction with the way you're starting to see development from his game.
Interesting, you mentioned the defense and how well it played for Michigan State against Nebraska. I mean, 7 sacks in that game. So you do think, hey, can you give still a reasonably inexperienced quarterback some trouble and maybe force him into some bad decisions? Hasn't made a ton of those this year. But to your point of are you fired up? I mean, if you can't get fired up about going into the shoe to take on number 1 Ohio State, there's something wrong with you, right? And so that helps anyone, I think, who plays against Ohio State. Just the fact that it's a big game feel.
You would hope so.
You would
hope so. The stamina mentally to get there can be a really difficult task sometimes.
So much more to come on our show. The zero earthly idea how this will actually play out. The Big Ten West narrowly averted a 5-way tie for first place this week. Would have happened had Northwestern beaten Iowa, a game that obviously came down to the final minute. Hawks instead now have a 1-game lead on Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. Northwestern and Illinois are 2 games back, and it is a race that we will be documenting. On Saturday, our football doubleheader, Illinois taking on Indiana, and that is followed by the West-leading Hawkeyes against Rutgers. It all starts with Big Ten Tailgate Saturday, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. So, Pat, we do have Iowa on top. It is not about style points. It is not even about actual points with Iowa. It is just simply about winning games, and you cannot argue with that result to this point for them. What do you think of this matchup with Rutgers?
That's a great line, I will say that. Look, this is a big week also for like Big Ten West versus Big Ten East. If this keeps going the direction it has, Hawkeyes better be ready. Asma, the Maryland Terrapins in Nebraska, Indiana, Illinois. 10 wins for the Big Ten East, 4 wins for the Big Ten West. All I know is this game, guys, Kirk Ferentz and Greg Schiano are 2 guys who are very comfortable in their own skin, which says punt the ball and play defense. I think there's going to be a lot of that going on. Field position battle. Iowa, most punts in the nation was 61. Second fewest going for it on 4th down, just 4 times, which tells you the way they're going to approach this. And I think Rutgers is like, fine, we'll get right into that with you. To me there, Rutgers ran for 232 yards against Ohio State, a really impressive number. That's good. I don't think they can do that against Iowa. Penn State ran for 215 against Iowa, but that was on 57 carries. So if they can just hammer away 3-4 yards at a time, maybe you can sustain that. But eventually it might come down to Gavin Wimsatt having to make some throws. He did that to a degree against Ohio State, but he also had the killer pick 6, which turned that game around. So who makes the fewest mistakes? Who wins the field position battle? And I know people say time of possession no longer matters. It might matter in this game.
And between the 2 squads, Rutgers is a team that looks very similar. Greg Schiano, like you're saying, Pat, coaches very similarly to Kirk Ferentz. And I think between the 2 programs, they both value special teams at such a high level, and both want to make sure they can punt and pin you down deep and set their defense up in a position to play downhill with aggression. And I think for Rutgers, the fact that they're comfortable in a game like that actually provides a different sort of challenge for Iowa this week, because the Iowa offense hasn't been in a position to really put pressure on the opponent. And so, to have a passing attack that isn't going to air the ball out that much, and Rutgers being comfortable, being risk averse, then, Iowa's not going to be in as good a position. This is part of what has played into their interception numbers being a bit lower this season, that they're not in a position to have an offense that's going to attack them vertically as frequently. So there's not as many takeaways for the offense. There's not as many times where that turnover margin can go advantage Iowa. And so Rutgers is a squad that's going to be comfortable saying, if we run it 3 times in a row and punt the football away and play some defense, then we will see likely this sort of slugfest type of matchup. And in the end, doing so at Kinnick Stadium, we've seen magical moments at Kinnick, some that end up counting, some that come off the board. But that special teams edge, where both teams value it to such a large extent, the return game for the Hawkeyes is one that I would imagine Greg Schiano has a very close watch on how his punt coverage unit will try and cover Cooper DeJean.
I want to quote you. The Iowa offense hasn't really been in a position to pressure opponents.
Yeah.
That was artfully said. That was
an
a
English
really
major.
nice way.
One of the top writers' workshop in the country at the University of Iowa.
Way of putting it. They have, I looked this up, so they have 296 yards of offense over the last 2 games combined.
Combined.
That would be 127th in the nation for average per game. And it's over the last 2, and they won one of them, and they very nearly won the other. They were one call away from winning the other. How about the other Big Ten Network game, Pat? 2 teams that are feeling better about themselves, Illinois and Indiana, both coming off a win. Illinois trying to stay in this race. I mean, it's not totally absurd to think that something bonkers could happen, and if Illinois wins out, that they could be a factor here. How do you see their game against the Hoosiers playing out?
Yeah, this is the feel-good bowl right now. Both teams, got a win they really needed to have, certainly for Indiana, but Illinois as well. And Illinois had a bit of a flair for the dramatic. They've had 5 one-score games. They've won 4 of them. It's a couple of really exciting comebacks at the end there, and this one was certainly one of them, the John Paddock pass there. And that was so impressive to me. Looked off the safety, throws the deep pass to Isaiah Williams. And John Paddock had a lot of experience playing football. It was at Ball State, but to come in 3 for 3 for 85 yards and a touchdown, his passer rating was 448 for that game. That's not bad. Indiana, though, I think they've got to feel a little better about themselves. Both of them still, as you said, Illinois still in the Big Ten West race. Both of them still harboring bowl hopes. I know Indiana's 3-6, but they're looking at their schedule saying, why can't we win these last 3 and get to 6-6? So there is more on the line in this game than meets the eye, I think, when you start digging into it.
That's one of those things where, as we're at this point in the season, Pat, we're for coaches trying to figure out how do I continue to sort of cajole my players to get better, to put that work in week in and week out, because the season feels so long for college players at this point. That's where at least Indiana having that carrot of bowl eligibility still available to them, that matters a lot, because for the Illini, not only becoming bowl eligible, but having a division championship within their reach, that certainly matters. And Illinois can still be striving for that. The Hoosiers having the potential to strive for bowl eligibility, that matters for Tom Allen, to be able to use that as the additional motivating factor for his team. Like the matchup we were just talking about between Rutgers and Iowa, Scarlet Knights have already become bowl eligible. So then how do you say there's another threshold for us to achieve if you're Greg Schiano? The Hoosiers having the ability to say we have a quarterback beginning to play his best football, playmakers that are really like Jalen Lucas. We're finding creative ways to get them the football, a defense that's starting to do some nice things as well. That all matters. But Illinois, they've been able to respond in late game moments. And so in a tight contest, the Illini are the team that can say, regardless of who our quarterback is, regardless of field position, there have been times where the Illini have been able to come up with those big plays. And certainly having a defender like Johnny Newton, anytime your defense is on the field, there's a big play waiting to happen.
Yes, he made up for lost time in the second half last week.
Quickly,
no question about it. You talk about bowl eligibility. In going through some of these bowl projections, there are a lot of projections that have 5-win teams getting in there this year. Thankfully, there was a period where I had to do that every Sunday, and it is the worst exercise of all time. And thank goodness it was before social media, so people couldn't come after me. I mean, I hated every minute of it, so I can't tell you who would make, whose APR is higher.
And there's even more bowl games now, right? It would be a tougher task.
Yeah, but I'm just saying 5 wins will not eliminate you this year. It doesn't seem like. So again, it provides even more of a carrot for some of these Big Ten teams. We're going to turn our attention to basketball. The year it was a season ago for the Northwestern Wildcats. Their second place finish in the Big Ten was their best since 1959. Big Ten Coach of the Year, Chris Collins, joining us now, our big interview. Coach, let's start. You got one game under your belt. You played Binghamton on Monday. It was not easy. You guys actually trailed at the half. What did you learn about your team on Monday night?
Well, that we are a real work in progress, which wasn't a big surprise. Although we have a great core returning with Boo, who's terrific, and Brooks and Ty Berry and Matthew Nicholson, we are integrating a lot of new guys, and just how that all fits together. It takes time, and we got great guys. They're really getting along well. They're connected well, but certainly there's a lot of things we got to continue to clean up. I thought we weren't as great defensively as we needed to be in the first half. I thought we settled down as it got into halftime and held them to 22 points, which was really encouraging the second half. And the thing you always like to see, though, is just the ability to kind of gut it out and grind it out. Maybe when it's not going great, Can you dig down and figure out a way to win? And I think that was the biggest thing I came out of it is that we got to get a lot better, but we have, the culture things in place to really dig down when we need to and find a way to win.
You mentioned the defense, and that was kind of the signature of this team last year. You were just such a tough team, particularly in the half court, really made people work. As you said, particularly in the first half against Binghamton, that just wasn't the case. Did get much better in the second half. But what is the key to that, like to being a great defensive team? And you guys were a great defensive team a year ago. What does this team need to do to get to that level?
Well, I just think defense is the one area of basketball where you really see the connectivity of five guys moving as one. And a lot of the things we do schematically, defensively, relies on everybody being in the right spot and having the trust of your teammate, to be where they're supposed to be if you're doing your job. And, I think we're still learning that. Our communication has to get better. I think that group last year, by the time we got, to the mid-season into conference play, they were just kind of so well drilled and connected and knew how to cover up for each other. And that's where we have to get. We're having some breakdowns in that area. And I know the guys want it. The will is there. The want to is there. We just got to keep getting experience, keep playing together. And, we know it still has to be an identity. I feel like we have some offensive weapons. We can space the floor and have some shooting and some scoring. But in order for us to be the best team we're going to be, we're going to have to be elite defensively like we were last year.
You were talking about Boo and what a huge boon it is to have him back this year. It's pretty remarkable. I always like to go back on recruiting rankings. He was the 318th ranked player in his class. At what point did you know he had a chance to be a special player?
There was a stretch in his freshman year, Dave, where I always knew he could score. And I really liked that about him. He was a guy that always put up huge numbers, was a volume scorer. Maybe shot selection was a little iffy at times, but you got to have guys who can put in the basket. And he had a stretch kind of early in his freshman year when we started playing him more and giving him extended minutes. He had a big game against Michigan State. I remember his freshman year at home. We were down big. I think he had a huge second half, kind of brought us back, followed that up with a couple other big games, ended up hurting his foot a little bit and missing time. But you kind of saw in that stretch that, man, the talent is there with experience, with maturity, with coaching, all those things, that he had a chance to be really good. And I mean, he's been even better. I mean, to be a first team all-league guy, preseason All-American, the legacy he's left as a leader, as a player in this program. I mean, he's going to go down, as one of the all-time greats ever at Northwestern. And it's been really fun to coach him these 5 years.
I want to ask you about another player on the team, and I was watching a little bit of your exhibition game, and Brooks Barnhizer just put on a show. I mean, he was unbelievable, absolutely filled the stat sheet. And we saw a little bit of this late last year, that he kind of became, there was all this talk about who could be your third scorer behind Boo and Chase Audige, who, of course, has moved on. And Barnhizer started to emerge, but give us a sense of what he can be this year, and particularly some of the matchup issues that he presents for people.
The fun thing about Brooks is he's such a gym rat. He's a basketball junkie. He lives, eats, breathes, sleeps ball. He's an incredibly hard worker. He's a smart player, obviously son of a coach, so he's been in the gym his whole life. He's just so unique, Dave, with what you can do with him. It makes it fun as a coach creatively because he's so big and strong with guard skills. He's 6'6", 225 pounds. He's physical. If you put a smaller guy on you, he can really punish you inside. If you try to put a bigger guy, he can come out and play off the dribble. You can put him in pick and rolls. You can just move him around and kind of play him all over the floor, which I think makes him very unique, very tough as a matchup guy. And certainly he's going to be a huge part of this team. You already saw our exhibition game. He was huge. Even the other night, we had a stretch in the second half where the game was in the balance and Boo picked up his fourth foul with about 8 minutes to go. And, we needed Brooks to kind of carry the load there until Boo came back those last 4 minutes, and he got 18 points, 13 rebounds. So, he's excited about the opportunity. He's worked hard. He's a guy that I think has a chance to have all league potential. And I said it last year, right? I mean, everyone asked me, how could we be good? We're going to be a good team if Boo and Brooks are all league players. There's no question, and everybody else kind of fills their role around those two guys.
I do want to ask you a little bit about last year, just in the context of the memories that it created. It's fun to watch those highlights that we opened up this segment with, and just think about the energy that surrounded this team and the fact that you really came through in the clutch when you needed to. Is there a moment that will most resonate with you, that when people say, hey, talk to me about that 22-23 team, this is the first thing that pops into your head?
I mean, there's a couple. I mean, it was such an incredible journey with a great group of guys who just bought in and believed in each other all year long. And I just kind of went along with the ride and tried to guide them in the right way. They were so determined, so tough. Obviously, that Purdue game, I mean, was super special. Super Bowl Sunday, everything that it represented, the crowd we had that day, the court storming, the excitement, that will always be a really special game. I think that last regular season game kind of was, at Rutgers, playing in one of the most hostile environments in the conference. If you win the game, you come in second place. If you lose, you come in ninth. We had lost, I think, 3 in a row, 3 out of 4. And to go on the road and win that game, it kind of encapsulated what that team was all about. And then, you always remember Selection Sunday when you're at a program that's only done it twice in, about 100 years, to be with everybody that supports you and family and friends, and to celebrate going to the NCAAs and a historic feat. Those are probably 3 moments that will always stick in my head with that team.
The last time you guys made the tourney, as you well know, the next year didn't go so well. I do think part of that was where you had to play. You didn't get to have a home court advantage that season, but still it was largely the same group of guys. I know you've been asked this a lot, but how do you avoid that with this group?
Yeah, I think every group is different. I have tried to, just look inside myself. How can I be better? Looking back 7 years or whatever that was, I had less gray hair. I didn't have to wear readers. But so I feel like, maybe I'm a little bit more experienced, being able to help lead these guys and do the best job I can do. It is a newer team. I mean, that team was really pretty much the same team. We had no new guys. I do think an influx of kind of new roles, new identities, kind of fresh personalities, will help, I think. But obviously it's going to be a tough slate. I mean, we got a huge game Friday night against a great Dayton team. We got a lot, the Big Ten is going to be as grueling and as daunting as ever before. And we saw last year, the fine line between 1 or 2 games being in second place versus 10th or 11th place. So we're going to have to be tough-minded. We're going to have to win close games. We're going to have to fight every night. But I've tried not to reflect too much with our current guys on that team, because none of those guys were here, and I want every journey to be different. And, hopefully we can keep those environments. In Welsh Ryan this year, they probably got us 3 or 4 wins just from the energy, the students, the fans. And we're going to need that again as we head into this schedule that we'll have to face.
We'll get to the Dayton game in just a moment. I always like to kind of get to know our coaches when we have them on. I think for fans, this kind of stuff is fun. You are an avid golfer. Tell me what your favorite course is that you've ever played.
Well, I've been really lucky. I would have to say number 1, Augusta National. Got the late minute invite on a 1-day notice. They said, can you go? I dropped everything to experience that. I've always loved the game of golf. I've been around it my whole life. Augusta National. I'm a big fan of Bandon Dunes out in Oregon. Right. It's kind of my happy place. Golf is the one thing for me, that kind of gets me away from the grind of coaching. You get outside. My son's a really good player. We spend a lot of father-son time playing, but going out to the coast of Oregon and playing those courses and kind of getting away from it all, that's always a special trip. I've gone a few times. So I would probably say those 2.
Who's your dream foursome, Chris, dead or alive?
Gotta say Tiger Woods. Would love to be around that guy. My son, I would want him to be in there. And maybe MJ, he's a big golfer. That would be a pretty good foursome. Tiger, MJ, me, and my son. So that'd be a pretty fun day.
And you would play it at the best course that you haven't played, which is what?
Oh man, I've never done like I'd love to get over to Scotland and Ireland.
Okay.
That's kind of next on my list. St. Andrews, some of those iconic venues over there. Trying to cross them off before I get too old and can't move around. But that'd be pretty cool to get over there. I think that's next on my list.
All right, give us a quick scouting report on Dayton.
Oh man, athletic team, terrific big man, Deron Holmes, one of the best bigs in the country. Really athletic, get after you defensively. A veteran team. They've gone out and got some transfers. They got some returners. Obviously, elite big man, very well coached. Anthony does a great job with the team, and we scheduled this for a reason. We're not in the ACC Challenge anymore. We're not in the Gavitt games this year. We knew we needed an early season test from a team we feel is going to be in the NCAA tournament. And it's going to be a really good barometer for us here in the first week to kind of see where we're at and where we need to go.
Looking forward to watching that one on Friday night. Chris Collins, always enjoy catching up with you. Thanks a lot for the time.
Thanks, Dave.
Back on Big Ten today as we continue our tour through the games involving the Big Ten West this week. You've got Wisconsin coming off a loss, so they are a game back of Iowa. And, of course, they lose the tiebreaker to the Hawkeyes as well. They cannot afford another stumble. They've got Northwestern. How do they avoid it? What are you watching in this one, Pat?
I think this is one of those attitude games, spring in the step games. Who's coming to practice ready to go, preparing, and really wants to keep going? Because both these teams are coming off a disappointing loss. For Wisconsin, I think it's a much bigger question. Northwestern, for all of they have been through, to still be in contention for a bowl game and even a little bit the Big Ten West is pretty impressive. Wisconsin, this is not what they're used to. There's some disappointment there. Been a little bit of transition problems, injuries, who's healthy. But who's showing up for practice and getting ready and really going to show up with something still to play for on Saturday?
And I think between the two, Pat, the crisis of concept that's existed seemingly throughout the season for Wisconsin's offense, that matters quite a bit now that you don't have your starting quarterback and you have your top two running backs that are out. And so a volume passing approach has sort of become the approach for Wisconsin offensively, and it just hasn't worked well for them. Can this offensive line, that was one of the most experienced groups in the Big Ten coming into the season, can they step forward to control the action for the Badgers against what's been an opportunistic and at times a really high-level Northwestern defense this season, led by David Braun, the interim head coach and defensive play caller? And if they can do that and the game comes down to a critical moment in the end, then that's where, each team will have an opportunity there. But for whatever reason, it's a little bit surprising to frame it this way, but I think Wisconsin is the team with more questions going into this game, and Northwestern kind of knows who they are.
And as Pat alluded to, one of the big questions for Wisconsin is who will play.
Yeah.
Braylon Allen's on the depth chart this week, which is promising, except for the fact he was on the depth chart last week as well. Tanner Mordecai did dress before the game last week, and they were asked a little bit about it, and Luke Fickell said, well, it would have been an emergency situation, but we'll see whether or not he works his way back here against Northwestern. Obviously, that would make a major difference for them. Like Wisconsin, we saw Nebraska stumble last week, and so now they get a game against Maryland. Nebraska one win away from ensuring a bowl. Again, we talked about the possibility of getting there with 5 wins, but how do the Huskers get back on track here against a Terps team that's really having a hard time over these last few games?
Yeah, I think the big thing there, Dave, is don't turn the ball over. It sounds simple. It's not as easy as it sounds, but Nebraska, when they've had 3 turnover games, is 0-3. And that's been the games where they really have been disappointing. Otherwise, if you're not just giving the ball away in bulk, they're there. They're right there. They've won a number of games. They've lost a couple close ones. So I think if you just don't give Maryland possessions, don't give them short fields, make Maryland's defense continue to play and stop you for the length of the field, I think this is Nebraska's path to victory. For Maryland, we got to see, can they stop the bleeding? That's just, they've been in a negative cycle for several weeks here. What Maryland team's going to show up, and can they, especially defensively, rise to the occasion here?
And it's really interesting because the game itself, just evaluating Talia Tagovailoa in a vacuum last week against so much duress, he really played well against Penn State, even though there weren't touchdowns going on the board and things of that sort. So for Nebraska, I still think the formula will be to control the clock, to stay ahead of the change, use a run game led by Heinrich Harburg to try and see if they can just make sure the game is at their tempo, not Maryland's, because Tagovailoa, he's played really well. He should be able to locate, I think, some big plays. But that pass rush for Nebraska, if they can get Maryland behind the chains, we saw Talia Tagovailoa, even as his pass protection broke down last week against Penn State, he was able to still find ways to get the ball out, to make plays. It's not as exotic a blitz package for Nebraska until you get to third down, but they've been able to pressure the quarterback at a high level with 3 and 4 and 5 and beyond in that Tony White defense this season. Second
in the Big Ten in sacks, and Maryland's given up 6 sacks each of the last 2 games. So that does seem like a huge part of that battle. What about Minnesota, also fresh off a disappointing loss? Now, different from Wisconsin, they've got the tiebreak against Iowa, remember. So they're in a little bit better shape among those teams that are a game back. Now they take on Purdue. How do they avoid another stumble and stay in this race, Pat?
Yeah, that's the thing. If you're Minnesota, you still have a whole lot to play for. Everything's on the table for you. You could win the tiebreaker against Iowa, so you're a big Rutgers fan this week. But then you also got to take care of your own business. I mean, giving up 27 points is a lot for them. Giving up a game-winning bomb at the end was pretty shocking. So you got to rally that defense a little bit, tighten up some things there, and then go back to your fundamentals on offense. And that's just going to run the ball, establish what you can there, maybe take a shot here or there offensively. But mostly you're looking to play a field position game like a lot of other teams in the Big Ten West and grind one out and hope your competition helps you give you another shot here at winning the Big Ten West.
And sort of surprisingly, under the radar, Ross-Ade Stadium has been a really hostile atmosphere for teams this season. They've been selling that stadium out pretty consistently. And I do think for Minnesota, this is such a huge game, man. I mean, you cannot lose to Purdue this week to still keep your Big Ten West Division title hopes alive and to come out and play the game at their tempo, to make sure that they're controlling the action, to see if you can force Purdue into some turnovers, because it's been such an Achilles heel at times for the Boilermakers this season. That will be vital. And Purdue is willing to try the strike play. They're willing to throw the vertical pass. And even as great a player as Tyler Nubin has been, there have been some critical moments where he has been the one to make the play to seal the game for the Gophers, but also some of that aggressiveness on the back end has come back to bite him, to bite that Gopher secondary at times this season also. So, Purdue will try to scheme that up and see if they can take advantage of some of that aggression from the safety position that Minnesota will end up throwing at you.
Offense been a struggle for the Boilermakers. 4 straight games scoring 14 or fewer points. Hasn't been great for Hudson Card here lately. See if they can turn it around against the Gophers. The dramatic conclusion of our show next. We're going to go big picture. We awarded a month from tomorrow. Mark your calendars. Pat, I think we have a short list of candidates at this point. Do we have a clear front runner in your mind?
I really don't think we do, Dave. I think that probably you look at the Pac-12 quarterbacks, Michael Penix at Washington, Bo Nix at Oregon, and start there. But it's not a short list, in my opinion. You've got, obviously, J.J. McCarthy at Michigan. You got Marvin Harrison at Ohio State. But also a couple other quarterbacks, Jordan Travis, who has led undefeated Florida State, and Jaden Daniels at LSU. They've got 3 losses, but he's had the best statistical season of any quarterback. And then I'm going to throw in running back Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, who has been phenomenal, leads the nation in rushing, and has led them back from a really disappointing start of the season, could take them to the Big 12 championship game.
It's unfortunate for Travion Henderson that he's been banged up, because his level of performance down the stretch could have potentially vaulted him in there. He just hasn't played nearly enough games. But I do think Marvin Harrison Jr., there's still some meat on the bone for what he can accomplish in the Heisman conversation, because the field, to Pat's point, is so wide open, and he is a highlight waiting to happen, even in an offense that struggled. A down game is a 2-touchdown performance for Marvin Harrison Jr. So what remains on Ohio State's schedule? That Heisman moment can be there for him, just like it can for J.J. McCarthy. I think he's a guy who, not only with his arm, but with his legs, he's become a very precise passer, and the highlight reel plays that he has the potential to make can be one that vaults him right in the thick of that conversation.
Did you just run out of time to mention Tory Taylor, or have you dropped that?
I ran out of time. Ran out of time. But on next week's show, we'll see.
If only the show were a little bit longer.
The battle of punters this weekend in Iowa City.
We will see you tomorrow.